This is the Amazing Teacher Podcast with Sam Rangel, episode number 5.
Welcome to the Amazing Teacher Podcast, where we sit down with amazing teachers and pick their brains for tips, strategies, and ideas that you can take into your classrooms and be amazing. Now, here's your host, Sam Rangel.
Welcome, amazing teachers, to the 5th episode of the Amazing Teacher Podcast. This is Sam from successintheclassroom.com, and I want to thank you for stopping by and listening to these conversations that I'm having with amazing teachers. The more I listen to these amazing teachers, the more inspired I get, the more I want to do more. I want to connect more. I want to create more positive relationships, and I'm hoping that you're feeling the same way. Today I'm sitting down with Larry Ferlazzo, and he has a website called Larry Ferlazzo's Websites of the Day, and it's a website that's just full of great resources for teachers. And I was reading his blog, and I noticed that he wrote a few books on student motivation. So I wanted to ask him about that. Student motivation is very important. I know, as any teacher will tell you, you're going to find those students that just don't get it, just don't want to be involved. Well, Larry shares his insights on that. He answers the question, how do you get students who are not motivated? And I found that very, very amazing. Also, he talks about classroom management, and he talked about a study that was done years ago that he uses in his class to help him with classroom management. So listen for the Marshmallow study. That was good too. Before we get into the interview, I'd like to ask a favor. Will you go on iTunes and give the podcast a positive rating for me? It would mean a lot to me, but more importantly, it will cause the podcast to rank a little higher in iTunes so that more teachers will be able to find it and take advantage of this great advice that we're getting from these amazing teachers. It would mean a lot to me. Just go on iTunes and you can search for the podcast, and then you can put a positive rating. To make it easy, on my website, there is a direct link to the podcast. Just go to theamazingteacher.com and click on the Show Some Love tab. Yeah, I know it's kind of silly, but that's what I'm asking. I'm asking you to show a little love. If you have found that this podcast has been beneficial and is doing something positive to help teachers, I would appreciate it if you show a little love and give the podcast a positive rating. It would mean a lot to me, so thank you in advance for that. So without further ado, let's head on into the phone interview that I had with Larry Ferlazzo. Ready? Here we go. Today I'm so happy to have Larry Ferlazzo from the Larry Ferlazzo Websites of the Day on the podcast. Welcome to the show, Larry.
Nice to be here.
Great. Well, thank you again for taking time out of your day to sit down and let me pick your brain. I know my audience will find a lot of great value in what you have to share with us today.
Like I said, I'm looking forward to your questions, and good questions always get me thinking and learning too.
Great. Well, before we begin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you teach? Where do you teach? And how did you get into teaching? And maybe tell us a little bit about your blog and what you're up to now.
Well, I teach at Luther Burbank High School in Sacramento. It's the largest inner-city school in the region. We have a couple of thousand students, primarily, divided roughly a third Latino, African American, and Southeast Asian students, and I've been teaching there for 10 years. I teach English to, primarily ninth grade English to mainstream students, and I also teach classes to newcomers, and I teach an International Baccalaureate class as well. As I mentioned, I've taught there for 10 years, and prior to that, I was a community organizer for 19 years, working in low-income communities around California, though I'm originally from New York City. I fled the East to seek sunnier weather. So that's a sort of a short and sweet synopsis. I decided to get into teaching because in my organizing work, I saw how much people were enhancing the quality of their lives through what they learned through organizing, the idea, recognizing the the power they had to make change, the power in relating to people different than themselves, the value in asking good questions, and people were learning this in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, and I thought to myself, well, how much better their lives would be if people learn this younger. So that's what led me into teaching.
Wow, that's interesting. You have a wide range of students there, from your international baccalaureate to your newcomers. Yeah, no, it always makes every day interesting, and it is indeed a wide variety. Sometimes my mainstream students, when I teach the mainstream classes, they try to remind me that their English is a little better and I don't have to speak as slow or use as many hand gestures, and also my family members tell me the same thing. Is that right?
But it also creates opportunities to make connections between the different groups as well.
Right. And you served as a community organizer?
Yeah, I worked for a national organization called the Industrial Areas Foundation, which was started by a man named Sal Alinsky in the 30s, that helps develop organizations of religious congregations, labor unions, and community groups in different cities around the country, building a self-sufficient organization that had an appetite for power and an appetite for change and was focused on developing leadership. So it was a good, I've certainly been able to apply a lot of what I learned as an organizer into the classroom.
Wow. I was looking at your blog, and I have my set of questions as far as, your thoughts on amazing teachers and their qualities, but I saw that you have a couple of books out on student motivation, and then you're working on a third. I thought that would be something I'd like to pick your brain on, because if anything new teachers need now is some ideas on how to motivate their kids. You mind sharing some about that?
Well, sure. And again, I think that's an example of where I was able to apply some of what I learned in organizing to the classroom. That, how I look at it is that I've actually never motivated a student, but I've helped create the conditions in which the student can help motivate themselves. And I think that's the key. There's tons of research that shows that extrinsic motivation over the long run really doesn't work. And though, I should take that back. It actually, extrinsic motivation has been found to work for to get people to do tasks that don't require a whole lot of creative or higher order thinking. So if you're working on an assembly line, extrinsic motivation will really work. If, perhaps if you want to just, get students to, to fill in a worksheet, potentially that can work. But for higher level stuff, for higher level work, it's intrinsic motivation has been shown to be the key. And there are lots of different ways to do that. I think one of the key ways is to develop relationships with students, try to identify what their visions and dreams for themselves, what are their interests, and then to be able to help them help connect those interests to what needs to be done in the classroom. Nobody wants to be viewed as a rat in a maze. I think does everyone use extrinsic motivation sometimes? Of course, I do as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are some times when, if you've got to get a student to do something in the midst, when you're dealing with 30 other students and you just got to get that student to do something, you use it. Or if there are times when you want to entice students to try to explore something new and unusual that they might not ordinarily explore, such as a new author, you can do that. Mm-hmm. But the key is, do you have an exit strategy and and a plan to talk with the student about how, this is not the way, this is not a blueprint for success. That ultimately what we want to do is find out what their goals are and where they want to go, and how what we're going to do will develop that. So I mean, a typical example as a parent, if you give your child $1 for every book he reads, it's less likely he's going to want to read books for pleasure after you stop paying him. Once the extrinsic motivation, the extrinsic reward is gone, so will the behavior. Or ranging to including, other things teachers can do, this idea of praise. Professor Carol Dweck is well known for her research on that. What you want to do is praise the actual action as opposed to praising the natural intelligence. Instead of telling some student, oh, you're so smart, you're so great, if students get that kind of feedback all the time, they're going to be less likely to want to risk and make mistakes and try something new because they're going to be more concerned about looking good instead of taking those risks. So there's no magic bullet for intrinsic motivation, but the question is, do you tend to focus more on helping students motivate themselves, or do you tend to focus more on you trying to motivate them? And you want to lean towards the intrinsic, both for your students' sake and for a teacher's own sanity.
Right.
It's much more energizing to emphasize intrinsic than extrinsic.
Right. So, because every new teacher, well, every teacher is going to have one of those students, or maybe several students, who just aren't motivated. They just don't want to be there. They don't see the importance of an education, right now. What specific ideas or tips or strategies can a teacher put into place that would help that student be motivated to do what has to be done in the class?
Well, I think the key element is to develop the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert Marzano talks about the relationship as being the key element. If the relationship between the teacher and the student is good, then that creates all sorts of other possibilities. If it isn't, it can sour most things. So I think identifying the self-interest of the students, is key. The story that I always tell is in one of my at one point in one of my classes, the students were supposed to write a persuasive essay about which they thought was the worst natural disaster to experience. There's one student who just didn't want to. He hadn't really done anything So I said, well, then write a persuasive essay about why the Raiders are the best team in the NFL. I needed to keep the idea is to keep the eye on the prize. The focus was helping students learn to write a persuasive essay. Not so much having the student write about what is the worst natural disaster. And the student got very excited about this and did it. And in fact, after he wrote it, he said, "Hey, Mr. Ferlazzo, I know I've missed a lot of other assignments. Now, can I write one about my favorite basketball team and get and try to make up, right?" And just coincidentally, the next week we had a parent-teacher conference, and he showed the essay to his mother, who had tears in her eyes. She had never seen him write an essay before. So, once you've got a relationship, a lot of things can come from that. But it takes a while. And does it always work? No. But I think, again, like Marzano said, if you don't have it, nothing much else is going to work.
Right. Now I think that building that relationship is so key. What I like is that you're willing to change the assignment for the student so that he could find that success and learn that skill. It's more than just doing the assignment the teacher gives him, but doing whatever it takes so that the student accomplishes the skill required.
Well, yeah, it goes along with this idea of picking which battles are worth fighting, and being flexible. And I think there's a story about Abraham Lincoln that in the Civil War, he basically made a deal with the Mormons in Utah to just leave him alone. That there were lots of problems, but he had bigger fish to fry. And he told us, and when he was asked about it, he told the story about when he was a boy, there was a lot of timber on a farm that he had to clear. And sometimes they'd come to a log that already had fallen down. It was just too hard to cut. It was too wet to burn. It was too heavy to move. So he just plowed around it. And I think, that's a key piece of good advice, I think, for all teachers to remember, to figure out, what is the prize that we're focusing in on, and what battles are worth fighting. And I think Abraham Lincoln was a pretty wise guy.
Yeah.
And and if that advice is good enough for him, it's good enough for me.
Right. And I think the mistake a lot of new teachers make is that they have their assignment, they have what they're requiring all the students to do, but they're not opening it up to other options that for the students to find other ways to accomplish that task. I know one of my greatest revelations is giving the different options of assignments. If we had to learn about a particular person in history, the typical assignment is to write a biography. But once I started, giving them other options like make a video, write a script, write a letter, kids were more motivated because they found something that they enjoyed doing instead of just following what the teacher asked for.
Well, yeah, William Glasser, he talks a lot about one of the key human drives is for autonomy and freedom, and actually attribute most class management problems to that, and the fact that teachers are not willing to acknowledge that and explore ways to provide autonomy, and there are lots of ways to do that are actually relatively painless for teachers. And I think the problem that all teachers experience is sometimes we get into power struggles. Yep. And we recognize that ultimately, the teacher can never win a power struggle. It may appear like we win, but ultimately, in terms of for our long-range goals, we lose. But it's hard. But we're also human. It's hard to, we can't remember it all the time in the heat of the moment, but we can recover. I got into just last week, a momentary power struggle with a student, realized, it didn't make sense, I made a mistake, apologized to him the next day, and moved on. Teachers need to recognize also that, saying sorry can go a long way to building relationships and helping students motivate themselves. And it's a good role model for students to see adults apologize.
Right, I totally agree. I think that's a great piece of advice for teachers from this podcast. The power of an apology. It's so easy. You want to maintain your authority in the classroom, but you sacrifice so much if you're going to have it, my way or the highway attitude all year long. But that apology means so much to the kids, and like you said, that's the great modeling for their conflicts.
Yeah. So those are just a few things to keep in mind in terms of, helping to deal with the students who don't really appear to want to work. One other example, Ben Franklin he's famous for one of the strategies he used he's famous for lots of things. One of the things he's famous for is the strategy he used in the Constitutional Convention to get people to support the Constitution and it's actually now, it's called the Ben Franklin effect, where he would go to people he knew they didn't like him, and he would ask them for a favor. Ask them to borrow a book or something like that. And what he knew is by asking people for favors, by granting those favors, those people begin to like the person that they granted the favor to. And, veteran teachers know this by, you identify the student who has provided the most challenges, and you give him some responsibilities. And you ask him to do that, right? You ask him to be in charge of this or whatever. And that that can go a long way to enhancing the quality of the classroom. Does it always work? No. But will it work more often than not? In my experience, that's the case. And again, worked for Ben Franklin. That's pretty good. That's pretty good credentialing.
Yeah, no, great advice. That's a great transition to my next question. When it comes to classroom management, new teachers have a hard time those first few years, and you were talking about freedom and autonomy. What specific maybe tips or strategies would you offer a new teacher who's struggling with classroom management?
Well, I think a few things. The best advice on classroom management that I ever read was from Marvin Marshall, who's a writer on a lot of positive classroom management strategies. And he says, what teachers should do is always be thinking, is what I'm doing now going to enhance my relationship with the student, or is it going to push them away? And that's some sage advice, I think, to keep in mind all the time. And so that's one thing. So the bottom line is what I'm doing deepening the relationship. And that doesn't mean they always got to be, a nice teacher. I mean, sometimes you got to speak the hard truths.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's done out of caring and you have the relationship, that can be a great opportunity to deepen the relationship. I mean, students need to know that you genuinely care, that you think about them outside of the 50-period class or the day class. And I think, some of the things that I do, ranging from, trying to get particular books that students want. I write about students in my blog, in a very positive way, and highlight them. Some students, I get stress balls that they can use. To try to think about ways that students know that you're going sort of the extra mile. I think another key thing is, even though there are going to be many times, at least for me, there are many times every ounce in my being wants to punish students. Mm-hmm. When they're just, when they're acting up.
Right.
Every ounce of my being just wants to come down like really hard. And generally, that is not going to help.
Right.
I think the idea of trying to take a few deep breaths, and then have some reflective time to think about it. Like when students are acting up, I always tell people, I'm just not feeling respected. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I do is a lot of what I call life skill lessons, is helping students. Where students learn about how self-control and perseverance are in their self-interest. There's the famous Marshmallow Experiment where 40 years ago, and it's been replicated many times since, where a little kid was put in a room with a marshmallow and told that the researcher said he was going to leave, and if the marshmallow was still there, the kid would get 2 marshmallows. And the kids who waited, 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, have been much more successful than the kids who did not, who were not able to exhibit self-control. And showing videos of the experiment, having students read about that research. Lots of research on grit and perseverance and the long-term advantages of that. So I think helping students create opportunities where students can have an academically rigorous lesson, that meets all the standards, but at the same time helps them learn why it is in their self-interest to control themselves, to show perseverance, to look at problems as opportunities, to take personal responsibility and not blame others. That it also creates plenty of opportunities, instead of a teacher having to always harp on students about, control yourself or something like that. I'm able to say, don't eat the marshmallow. And able to refer, right? And that's a much more energizing interaction than, Johnny, stop throwing spitballs.
Right,
now.
right.
So, those are some quick classroom management tips.
Don't eat the marshmallows. I love that. I love that. And so you show the video first. I mean, obviously, but you and the kids will write about it, or?
Yeah, well, they actually read. I mean, there are a fair amount of articles about it, and students will read parts of the articles, and they'll see videos, and they'll reflect on it and write about it, and they'll think about times when they've shown self-control and when they haven't, and what are some ways that they. The research, what the Marshmallow Experiment talks about, is the importance of distracting.
Mm-hmm.
So what can they do when they're feeling like they're losing their self-control? So there's lots of different ways.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Great takeaways from this interview, Larry. I really appreciate you sharing that. It looks like you've done a lot of research. I mean, you're pulling information from a lot of places. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of good research out there. Of course, there's a lot of bad research out there too. But people have done a lot of work, and I think a lot of it is applicable to the classroom and doesn't get out there as much as it should.
Right. And I think that's why your blog is so cool, because you post a lot of other websites that have that information that teachers can use, and so that great resource there. The name of the podcast is the Amazing Teacher Podcast, where I'm trying to help teachers be amazing in the classroom. So I'd like to ask you one last question. What in your experience, you've run across, I'm sure, a lot of amazing teachers. What would you say are some of the qualities of amazing teachers? It sounds like building relationships is high up there.
Oh, key. I mean, building relationships, being flexible, looking at problems as opportunities,
mm-hmm.
Having the capacity to apologize, and recognize that, we're human, teachers are human beings, and kids are kids. The kids are not little adults. They're kids.
Right. So good.
And I think to also, having a life outside of the classroom. This, 80, 70-hour a week time in the classroom does not create a healthy psyche, and the teacher is also not going to last very long.
Right.
So to have a life, but I think those are some things. Just and just again to recognize, I think what I mentioned about Abraham Lincoln, that there are some battles that are not worth fighting,
mm-hmm.
and to have the ability to recognize which ones are and which ones aren't.
Yeah, that's so true, especially with the burnout rate of teachers. 3 years, 4 years. Not being able to step back and take a breath, having a life outside of the classroom, I think is key. Very, very good advice. Very good advice, Larry. So, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we say goodbye, Larry?
No. I mean, I think I covered all the all the key things that I wanted to mention. Thanks for the opportunity to think aloud. Again, always talking about this makes me think about new connections and new strategies too. Oh, well, actually, though, there is one other thing I would strongly encourage teachers to do is to get involved in social media in terms of, and to connect up. There are so many thousands of teachers, particularly on Twitter or other social media, that teaching can feel like it's an isolated profession.
Mm-hmm.
But any problem or question that you may have has probably been experienced or answered already by some teacher out there, and to not take advantage of all those other educators that are ready, willing, and available to connect, I think is a major oversight.
Right. Very true. Very true. I wish I had Twitter when I was first starting out. It would have been a lot easier for me.
Yeah, well, it's a great resource, and like I said, all the other. There are plenty of other. Whether it's Facebook or Twitter, or there are networks on Ning and English Companion. There's just so many resources out there. So
right.
So that would be one other thing that I think would be important for teachers to keep in mind.
Very true. Very true. So, if teachers wanted to get in touch with you or find you, say thank you for your insight here on the podcast, where can they get a hold of you?
Well, I can be contacted on Twitter. There's a contact form on my blog. I write a weekly teacher advice column for Education Week, and you can contact me there. So there's lots of different. I'm pretty accessible.
Yeah, and I'll make sure I'll put those links up on the show notes. Again, Larry, thank you so much for taking the time out to let me pick your brain. This has truly been idea-filled and tip-filled podcast, and I'm sure the audience is going to have a lot of takeaways that they can put into practice into the classroom. So thank you again for all your help today.
Great. Well, thanks for organizing. I look forward to listening to the other podcasts that you have as well.
Great. So, listeners, I know you have received a lot of great information in this episode. Now it's up to you to take it back to your classroom and implement what you learned today. So, until next time,
be amazing.
The Amazing Teacher Podcast is brought to you by SuccessInTheClassroom.com. Learn more about being an amazing teacher by visiting SuccessInTheClassroom.com or TheAmazingTeacher.com.